Well, here we are, another lesson on Joshua and Judges for beginners, from conquest to settled land. The lesson today, number 11, and the title of this lesson is Samson, a man of great strength and weakness. And if the Lord is willing, we will be covering Judges chapter 13, verse 1 to 16, verse 31. So let's have a bit of introductory material as far as Samson is concerned. Judges 13 to 16 introduce Samson, one of the most famous and complex figures in the book of Judges, whose life was marked by both extraordinary strength and profound personal weaknesses. He was chosen before birth to deliver Israel from the oppression of the Philistines. Samson was set apart as a Nazirite, endowed with immense physical strength that enabled him to perform remarkable feats, including slaying a lion with his bare hands and defeating large numbers of Philistines single-handedly. However, despite his God-given abilities, Samson's life was also characterized by impulsiveness, moral lapses, and a lack of self-control, particularly in his relationships with women. These weaknesses often undermined his potential as a leader and brought personal downfall. Yet, in spite of his flaws, Samson contributed significantly to Israel's welfare by disrupting the Philistine dominance, ultimately sacrificing his own life to strike a decisive blow against Israel's enemies in a final spectacular act of redemption. And so his story highlights the tension between human frailty and divine purpose, illustrating how God can use imperfect individuals to accomplish His plans. One of the lessons, one of the themes that we see in the book of Judges is God using all kinds of weak and sinful people to accomplish great things. So we begin in chapter 13, talking about his birth and his calling. Samson's divine calling is introduced in Judges 13 during a time when Israel was oppressed by the Philistines. The story begins with the appearance of an angel of the Lord to a barren woman, the wife of Manoah, a man from the tribe of Dan. The angel announces that she will bear a son who will begin to deliver Israel from the Philistines. And this son, Samson, is to be set apart as a Nazirite. We read about the Nazirite vow in Numbers 6, verses 1 to 21. And the word Nazirite, Nazir, which means to set apart or to consecrate. It doesn't mean from the city of Nazareth. Some people get that confused, just that the word Nazir means to set apart or to consecrate. And he would be consecrated from birth, which means he would be consecrated to God and live under specific vows, including abstaining from wine, avoiding contact with dead bodies, and never cutting his hair. And so there's something significant about the way that Samson was called in comparison to other judges in the book of Judges. A couple of things we want to mention. First, he was preordained from birth. Unlike most of the other judges, Samson's calling is unique in that it was divinely announced before his birth. This emphasizes God's sovereign plan and control over Israel's deliverance. The fact that Samson's mission was determined before his birth highlights his special role in God's design to deliver Israel from the Philistines. In other words, the Israelites had not been crying out to God to send them a leader or a deliverer. God, in His sovereignty, selected Samson even before he was born. Also, the business of the Nazirite vow. Samson's lifelong Nazirite vow signified a deep personal consecration to God. While most Nazirites undertook the vow temporarily, Samson's vow was meant to last his entire life, symbolizing that his role was not just a temporary one, but an enduring commitment to serve God's purpose for Israel. In other words, his strength was tied to his obedience to this vow, especially the condition of never cutting his hair. Also, this was a time of Israel's oppression. The angel's announcement came during a time of great Philistine oppression, marking a critical point in Israel's history. The timing signifies God's intervention at a moment of deep need, showing that even in periods of Israel's rebellion and suffering, God was still raising up deliverers for his people. And then, of course, there was the manner of the announcement. The angel of the Lord's appearance to a barren woman carries deep significance. Throughout the Bible, God often brings hope through a miraculous birth. For example, Isaac and Samuel and John the Baptist. Samson's birth to a previously barren woman not only underscores God's power, but it also hints at the extraordinary nature of Samson's mission. The miraculous nature of the announcement sets Samson apart as a chosen instrument of God. Well, next we learn about Manoah and his encounter with the angel. In Judges 13, 8-23, Manoah, who is the husband of the barren woman to whom the angel of the Lord first appeared, he has a significant encounter with this angel. Manoah plays a particular role in seeking clarity about the divine message concerning his soon-to-be-born son. And so after hearing the initial announcement from his wife about the angel's visit, Manoah prays to God, asking for the angel to return and give them further instructions on how to raise the child who would be born. Manoah desires guidance on how to fulfill God's instructions and ensure that the child is raised according to God's will. Something very rare, someone praying to have the angel come back or the appearance be repeated. But God answers Manoah's prayer, and the angel of the Lord appears again to his wife. This time she runs to call Manoah so that he too can hear directly from the angel. And so Manoah asks the angel to clarify the instructions for the child's upbringing. And the angel repeats the instructions given earlier to his wife. The child must be raised as a Nazirite, which includes avoiding wine and unclean foods and never cutting his hair. This reiteration emphasizes the importance of Samson's Nazirite vow and the sacred role that he would eventually play in Israel's deliverance. And so Manoah offers to prepare a meal for the angel, but the angel instructs him to offer a burnt offering to the Lord instead. And so Manoah, not realizing the visitor is an angel, asks for the angel's name so that they can honor him when the prophecy comes true. The angel responds by saying that his name is beyond understanding or wonderful, hinting at the angel's divine origin. And so Manoah prepares a burnt offering on a rock as instructed, and as the flames rise from the altar, the angel ascends to heaven in the fire, revealing to Manoah and his wife that this was indeed a divine messenger. So this miraculous event solidifies the divine nature of the encounter and, of course, the importance of the child that they are about to raise. Both Manoah and his wife have now had an encounter with the divine being. An interesting event takes place here after the appearance of the angel. Manoah, realizing that they had seen an angel of the Lord, expresses fear that they will die, as it was believed at that time that seeing God or his direct representatives would result in death. His wife, however, reassures him, pointing out that if God had intended to kill them, he would not have accepted their offering or revealed the promise of a child. And so Manoah has a special role at this point. His primary role is that of a faithful servant seeking to better understand God's will, and his prayer for guidance reflects his desire to follow God's instructions carefully, ensuring that they raise Samson according to the divine purpose. Also, he's a partner in the divine calling. Manoah's involvement in the encounter reflects the importance of parental responsibility in nurturing children who are set apart for God's work. And so both Manoah and his wife play a key role in understanding and following through on God's plan for Samson. And so in Judges chapters 14 and 15, we get a glimpse of Samson's strength and his early victories. His early displays of physical strength highlight his God-given abilities as a warrior. Yet these acts are often intertwined with impulsive decisions driven by personal desires and emotion. This contrast between his great physical strength and his lack of self-control reflects the complexity of his character, and it also foreshadows both his success and his eventual downfall. A few examples of these. First, the killing of the lion in Judges 14, 5 and 6. As Samson travels to Timnah to arrange his marriage to a Philistine woman, he encounters a young lion. Empowered by the Spirit of the Lord, he tears the lion apart with his bare hands, demonstrating his extraordinary physical strength. After his Philistine wife reveals the answer to a riddle, Samson reacts with fury. He goes to Ashkelon and kills 30 Philistines, taking their clothes to pay for his wager. This act of strength further emphasizes his ability to overpower his enemies with ease. But the context, of course, in which he did this was because he had lost a wager with the friends and family of his wife-to-be. And then there's a question of using foxes to burn Philistine crops in Judges 15, 4 and 5. In response to the Philistines giving his wife to another man, Samson catches 300 foxes, ties their tails together, attaches torches, and then sets them loose in the Philistine grain fields. This act of destruction, while clever, while requiring great strength, was driven by personal revenge. So we get to see the complexity of the man here. Yes, he has great strength and yes, great power, but not always used in the right way. And then there's the event of the jawbone of a donkey used in a battle in Judges 15, 14 and 15. This is one of his most famous feats. Samson kills 1,000 Philistines using the jawbone of a donkey. This victory once again illustrates his immense strength and ability to overcome overwhelming odds. And so we see his examples of his strength, but we need to contrast his strength with his impulsive actions to get a better measure of him as a man. And so first event we talk about in Judges 14, Samson's first impulsive action is his decision to marry a Philistine woman. Despite his parents' objections, his desire for her is based purely on physical attraction. He says, "She is right in my eyes." And it shows his disregard for Israel's covenantal laws against intermarrying with pagan nations. This impulsiveness sets the stage for future conflicts. At his wedding feast, Samson proposes a riddle to the Philistine guests, wagering that if they can solve it, he will give them 30 sets of clothes. The riddle is based on his earlier encounter with the lion, and it ultimately leads to tension when his wife, under pressure from the Philistines, reveals the answer. Samson's impulsive reaction to this betrayal is to kill 30 men in Ashkelon in order to pay off his debt. Another revenge-driven action, this time in Judges 15, are largely driven by personal revenge this time. His anger over losing his wife leads him to burn the Philistines' crops, escalating the conflict. Even the famous battle with the Philistines using the jawbone of a donkey comes after he is delivered into their hands by his own people who fear the Philistines' retaliation. And so we see a pattern of impulsiveness and the consequences of his impulsiveness. Many of Samson's actions are driven by anger or desire or revenge. His decisions are often reactive rather than thoughtful. And while his strength allows him to overpower his enemies, his impulsiveness leads to greater conflict and personal entanglements. Unlike other judges, Samson's battles with the Philistines often seem to arise from personal grievances rather than a strategic plan to liberate Israel. His desire for a Philistine wife and his reaction to personal slights contrast with the role of a leader acting on behalf of his nation. His personal vendettas with the Philistines escalate the conflict without any long-term resolution. And so despite Samson's impulsiveness, his feats of strength are often enabled by the Spirit of the Lord. We read about that in Judges 14:6, 14:19, and 15:14. This demonstrates that God is still working through Samson, even when his actions are driven by personal desires. God uses Samson's strength to disrupt Philistine dominance, but Samson's personal weaknesses ultimately undermine his leadership potential. He is a man, when you look at his life, you wonder what could have been had he been less weak and less subject to his personal desires. And so in Judges chapter 16 begins the tragic turning point in Samson's life, culminating in his betrayal, capture, and his final act of redemption. His story serves as a powerful example of how great physical strength can be undermined by moral and spiritual weakness. And so we look at his downfall. First of all, it begins with Delilah. He has a relationship with Delilah in Judges 16. Samson falls in love with Delilah, a woman from the valley of Sorek. The Philistine leaders agree to capture Samson, and they approach Delilah and offer her an enormous sum of money to find out the secret of Samson's strength. And Delilah agrees to betray Samson in exchange for the bribe. Delilah then repeatedly asks Samson to reveal the source of his strength in chapter 16, verses 6 to 16. Samson lies to her 3 times, each time telling her a different false method of weakening him. Delilah tests each false answer, but each time Samson escapes easily. However, her persistent nagging wears Samson down, and he eventually tells her the truth, that his strength comes from his Nazirite vow, particularly his uncut hair, a symbol of his dedication to God. And so after Samson reveals the truth, Delilah has someone shave his head while Samson sleeps. With his hair gone, the Lord's strength leaves him, and he is powerless when the Philistines seize him. They gouge out his eyes, and they take him to Gaza, where he is bound with bronze shackles, and he is forced to grind grain in prison, an act of humiliation and subjugation. The critical moment of Samson's downfall comes when he believes that even after losing his hair, he can defeat the Philistines. However, the Spirit of the Lord has left him, and he realizes too late that his strength was not merely physical, but spiritual, and it was tied to his relationship with God. And so while in prison, Samson's hair begins to grow back, symbolizing the potential for redemption. This leads to Samson's final act of redemption and his death. The Philistines, celebrating Samson's capture, attribute their success to their god Dagon. During a great feast in Dagon's temple, they call for Samson to be brought out as entertainment. He's blinded, he's humiliated, and Samson is led into the temple, which is packed with Philistine leaders and citizens. In a moment of humility and repentance, Samson prays to the Lord, asking for strength one last time so that he can take vengeance on the Philistines for his blindness. This prayer reflects his renewed dependence on God rather than his own abilities, because in all of the other events, you don't read or hear about Samson offering God any prayers, or you don't see where he is seeking God's wisdom on how to handle situations. Only in this particular event, he humbles himself and asks God for help. And so Samson is positioned between two central pillars of this temple, and with all his might he pushes against the pillars, collapsing the temple, killing himself along with thousands of Philistines. In his death, Samson accomplishes his great victory as he destroys more Philistines in this single act than he did in all of his lifetime. Samson's body is then recovered by his family, and he is buried in the tomb of his father Manoah. His 20 years of judging Israel come to an end, and despite his personal failures, his death is seen as a significant moment of deliverance for Israel from Philistine oppression. I want to talk about the moral weakness leading to Samson's downfall, because it's the main theme of his story. We always think about his strength. We think Samson, we think powerful strength, but we can also think Samson, moral weakness. He was a man who was morally weak. He had a lack of self-control. Samson's attraction to Philistine women and his impulsive relationships consistently undermined his potential as a leader. His inability to resist Delilah's persistent pressure ultimately leads to his betrayal. Another weakness, he was reckless with his divine calling. Throughout his life, Samson displayed a disregard for his Nazirite vow. He came into contact with dead bodies. That was one of the things, one of the conditions of the vow, that he would never come in contact with dead bodies. But he killed the lion, and he handled the lion after the lion was dead. The jawbone of a donkey, well, that donkey was dead. He came in contact with that dead animal's bone. He also sought personal revenge rather than focusing on his God-given mission to deliver Israel. His decision to share the secret of his strength with Delilah reveals how carelessly he treated his divine calling. And also, he had overconfidence in his strength. Samson often assumed his strength would never leave him, even when he was not in a close relationship with God. This overconfidence blinded him to the fact that his strength came from God, not from himself, and led to his ultimate capture. Had Samson demonstrated greater moral strength and obedience to God's commands, his potential as a judge and deliverer for Israel could have been far more impactful in history. In a section that could be called, what could have been. What could have been had Samson not had these weaknesses? Well, what could have been? There could have been deliverance without personal downfall. With greater moral discipline, Samson could have led Israel to victory over the Philistines without falling prey to personal temptations and betrayals. His strength, coupled with faithfulness to God's law, would have enabled him to be a lasting leader and not just a tragic figure. Another thing that could have been a more unified Israel. Instead of being driven by personal vendettas and impulsive actions, Samson could have used his strength to unite Israel against the Philistines. His leadership could have rallied the tribes together for a more sustained campaign against their lifelong oppressors. And of course, he could have left a greater spiritual legacy. Rather than being remembered for his flaws and his tragic death, Samson could have left behind a legacy of faithfulness and spiritual leadership. His life would have served as a model of obedience, inspiring future generations of Israelites to trust in God's power. And so Samson's downfall in Judges chapter 16 is marked by his moral weaknesses, his impulsiveness, his lack of self-control, and overconfidence in his strength. However, his final act of redemption, in which he humbly seeks God's strength one last time, demonstrates that God can still work through flawed individuals to achieve his purposes. Had Samson been stronger morally, he could have accomplished far more for Israel, uniting the nation and delivering them from Philistine oppression without the personal tragedy that characterized his life. His story serves as a reminder that true strength comes from obedience to God and not simply physical power. And so there's a lesson here. They're not 5 lessons or 10. I just drew one main lesson here, and it's this: the danger of ignoring accountability. The danger of ignoring accountability. Throughout Samson's life, he acted independently and impulsively, without seeking guidance or counsel from others. He often made decisions based on his desires and emotions, such as choosing to marry a Philistine woman or engaging in personal revenge. Despite his role as a judge, Samson lacked accountability to his family, to his community, or even God until his final moments. His isolation from godly counsel led to a series of destructive decisions that could have been avoided. So there's an application here in modern life. In modern life, the importance of accountability cannot be overstated. Whether in relationships, work, or faith, we need trusted individuals who can provide guidance, correction, and support. Samson's downfall is a reminder that unchecked independence and refusal to seek accountability can lead to poor decisions and long-term consequences. However, cultivating relationships with those who offer wise counsel and being open to feedback helps us stay aligned with God's will and avoid unnecessary pitfalls. All right, well, that's our lesson for today concerning Samuel. All right, so here's our reading assignment. It'll be our final reading assignment for the book of Judges. So I want you to reread Judges 13 to 16, the story of Samson, and then read ahead for our next lesson, Judges 17 to 21. I'll say it one more time. You do the reading at home. We do the explaining here in class. All right, thank you for your attention. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.